Now we've come to a part in David's life when he's on the run. David had beaten Goliath, and as a result, remember King Saul, he said that whoever would beat Goliath would have one of his daughters to marry. So David was able to get a wife because he beat Goliath, and everyone loved David. And they were singing, Saul has killed his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. And the moment David beat Goliath and people started to praise him, people thought about Saul, he just went down and David just rose. And people began to think more about David than the king. And the king was angry, so angry and so jealous. And Saul was going to spend the rest of his kingly life being jealous, hunting for David. More than anything else, he wanted to kill David. A man who would fight for Saul. He was loyal to Saul. He would do anything for the king. But yet Saul was so eaten up inside with jealousy, it was going to eat him alive. And David was on the run because Saul already was trying to kill him. And David ran, and the first person he came to, we're reading the Bible in 1 Samuel 21, David came to a priest called Ahimelech. And this was a priest, a wonderful man of God. And David says, can I have some food? Can I have some bread? He was hungry, he was on the run. And the priest thought, David, why are you on your own? You're the man who's killed Goliath. Why have you not got armor with you, soldiers with you? And David, he said, well, I'm on a secret business here, and I can't really disclose what I'm after. And I need some food, and I need a sword and a spear. And very quickly the priest said, okay, that's fine. He only had special bread, but he gave it to David. And he said, the only weapon I have is Goliath's sword. It was kept here as a monument, as a memorial. And he gave him Goliath's sword, the big heavy sword, and he gave it to David, and he gave him some food. But listening in the background was a man called Doug. He was looking after the cattle, the chief herdsman. And he overheard what was happening. And he thought, David, I haven't heard the king sending David to the priest for some special business. And he went back. And David was now on the run. And lots of people were hearing about David being hated by the king. And they loved David, they respected him. And they came and they joined up with David. And before long, David had an army of about 600 soldiers. Not soldiers, but normal men who were willing to fight for David and defend David's life. People who were no longer loyal to the king, but who were loyal to David. And David would train these men up. And most of all, he would teach them about God. And he would pray and tell them how important it is that they're following God's ways and not his own ways. And David would spend weeks, days, months, and even years in the forest, in the mountains, in the caves, in the wilderness, in the valleys, on the run from Saul and his soldiers. And you see Saul got his soldiers together. Instead of fighting the enemy, there's one man who's my number one enemy. It's David, the shepherd boy. And I want him brought here dead or alive. Saul was being corrupted within himself. This jealousy was starting to affect him. And that's a lesson for all of us. Do you see, when you start getting jealous of someone, you need to stop it right away. It will eat you alive. And what are you going to gain from it? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. But you're going to get worse because of it. And Saul is an example. And this is the beginning of Saul's death, by the way. He had everything going for him. God was on his side. But because of the way he went, the Spirit of God departed from him. And now was living in the flesh, living in his own strength, and he's becoming nothing. And he's the whole time searching for David. In the meantime, Doug came to the king. Doug was the chief herdsman. He said to the king, I overheard David. He went to visit Ahimelech, the priest, and he was saying he needed bread and a sword because he's on the king's business. The king said, I never sent Saul. And he brought the priest, and he said to David, ask you for this here. Has David got a special errand? And the priest said, Saul, what are you talking about? There's no one loves you more than David. David's family respect you more than any other family. They come from a good family. Why are you acting the way you are? And Saul said, David is an enemy of mine. We're trying to get him because he's getting people together to fight me. His mind was gone. And Saul said, because you have betrayed me, he turned it on the priest. Because you betrayed me, I'm going to have you killed. And he asked the soldiers to kill him, but no soldier would. He said, Doug, you kill him. Not only him, but there were 85 other priests, and Doug with his spear and his sword, he killed every one of them that day. And the news was quickly brought to David that all these priests had died because of something he done. And David felt terrible. David felt bad, and he felt responsible that he must protect those people from terrible kings like Saul. And now God was beginning to challenge David. For one day he's going to become the greatest king ever that Israel has ever known. And now there's a big problem. It's getting all out of control. See, one little sin leads to a bigger one, leads to a bigger one, until it gets out of control. What's the root of it? What's the root of this sin? Jealousy. Because Saul got jealous of David. Now 85 innocent men have died because one of them helped David and he didn't even realize what he was doing. And now we're going to find out what happened next.